You guys are watching Now You See TV. This is John Pounders, and tonight, as always, we have David Carrico on Saturday nights. Tonight is going to be an interesting show. We have Gary Wayne, the author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Most of you guys that listen to Now You See TV regularly know exactly who Gary is. We've had him on so many times, and we just appreciate having him on every time because he's got so much knowledge and information. And when you put Gary Wayne and David Carrico together, you can't beat this. So this is going to be awesome for you guys to listen to. So much information on the subject. In my opinion, these two are probably the premier experts on these subjects. There's nobody that knows more, in my opinion. There's other people that know a lot as well, and they're very good, but these guys have been studying this stuff for a very long time. Tonight's show is going to be about Illuminati, bloodlines, and surviving giants, and the expose of that and the tracking of that. Gary Wayne's done a lot of research in his book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, on this subject, as well as David has done a lot of research on this subject. So it's going to be interesting. I'm putting the show in David Carrico, the Saturday night ride host, Midnight Ride on Saturday, and he's going to take you guys down this journey with Gary Wayne. And I just want to say thank you guys for coming on, and we appreciate you.
We just want to say thanks to you, John. And as always, it's a great honor to be here on Now You See TV. And it's a great honor to be on with my friend and the friend of Now You See TV, Gary Wayne. Welcome to Now You See TV, Gary, once again.
Yeah, so happy to be back. So looking forward to the show tonight, and I'm sure we're going to get into some things that it's going to tweak some more curiosity and hopefully dig into things a little bit further, because that's kind of what, my agenda is to get people to start thinking for themselves out there and to start asking more critical questions as to what's really going on.
That's exactly right. And you are absolutely one of our favorite people to have on the Midnight Ride, because your book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, is just absolutely fantastic. It's got so much information in it on this and so many other topics. And we're going to quit puffing one another and let's just get into topics. We don't want to sprain our arms slapping one another on the back, so let's just roll it.
And, so you don't want to do what they do in Hollywood, then just keep giving each other awards and stuff.
There you go. But in all seriousness, Gary's research is just pristine on the topic. So our topic tonight, the Illuminati family, surviving giants, and we're going to be talking about the secret societies of the Illuminati families, how they do what they do. So, Gary, just take us where you will tonight, my friend. Let's get into the topic.
Well, I'm just not quite sure where you want to start digging in on this, because it's and at what sort of year. So maybe guide me as to where you think is a good place to start, so that
all right,
start building it.
Let's pick it up with the Rothschilds, and let's come down and let's identify some of these major Illuminati families, how they relate to one another, how they function, and let's just start with the Rothschilds.
Okay, well, let's start talking a little bit about just how they came about and where they kind of fit into this whole sort of mixture. And I believe it was David Rothschild who said that he was descended from the Essenes and is a descendant of Jesus. If it's not David, it's one of the other ones. But that's essentially one of their core beliefs, although I'm not convinced that they are as pure-blooded as some of the more ennobled families, because they're not amongst the most ennobled families as you trace through history and what you and I have talked about in the past, David. Yeah. And when they first turn up, they turn up in Germany as the Bauer family, and Meyer Amschel Bauer. And he's born in about the 1740s, and somewhere in the early 1700s anyways. And not until he partners in through Freemasonry with King Wilhelm IX, as I recall, and starts working with some of the royal families, does he gain any sort of wealth or notability with his family. And through that, he starts to be able to make trades and get inside information and start to make some money through working in the courts of Germany. And then by the 1750s, he's got a business going, so is the Bauer family. And in 1770 or so, which is a very interesting era, 1770 has so many significant events in and around the 10 years before and 10 years after, he forms his first bank in Frankfurt. And so he starts to become the banking arm for all of the secret societies, and you know, funding wars, doing whatever the secret societies and the royal family is doing, and making sure governments are indebted to the ennobled families, because not all of the royal families are working in sort of a monolith movement. So, and they're not all what they would be considered ennobled bloodlines. There's a give and take that's going on those families all of the time. And so they continue to move forward and growing rich. And they needed to, just to back up a step, is the secret societies needed to replace the banking arm that was done by the Templars, right? And in 1307, on Friday the 13th, they were disembodied, and the whole banking arm that the secret societies were utilizing came crashing down, and it sort of dispersed all over the place. So they needed to recreate that avenue, just as, you know, all these other different groups are being recreated in and after 1307. So you have a centralized group with the Templars, and just before in 1188 at the Cutting of Elms, you have one splitting. Now you have a complete dissemination in 1307 of the Templars. And so you have the Rosicrucians being set up after 1188. And then you have Freemasonry, the modern Freemasonry as we would know it, being set up after the Templars, as the Templar refugees escaped to mostly Scotland, but to some other societies and countries as well. But that's where Freemasonry starts up, right? So you've got Freemasonry starting up in around, say, the 1500s in a formal way, but in the process of reforming before. You have the Rosicrucians being set up. You have the Illuminati being set up in about the 1500s, and then formalizing more to a core in the 1770s again. And you have the Jesuits being set up in about 1500s, and you have the Royal Society being formed by, you know, 1640s, 1660s, piecing together all the different aspects that they want. And so this banking arm of the Rothschilds is just one of those reassembling of Humpty Dumpty, so to speak, right?
I think you've hit on a real key aspect here in connecting the dots, and there's a lot of dots connecting, but in seeing what the Rothschilds did at Frankfurt, this was the extension of, and if you will, New Templarism. This was the new Templar banking system that through Freemasonry was going to extend itself through all of these groups. And as you well said, we can see at this time the coordinating hand of Freemasonry between all of these groups, just like Weishaupt. He was not a Freemason when he founded the Illuminati, but he quickly saw Freemasonry as the way to coordinate all this. So that is so important for us to see here with the Rothschilds and the role that they played here, which, as they said, if I've got the money, I think Meyer said, you know, if I can print the money of a country, I don't care who makes the laws. So
yeah, exactly. And it's important to note how not only do the Illuminati utilize what Freemasonry is doing and will continue to do, but the Rothschilds will use the same channels just as Freemasonry does. So as the English Commonwealth expands, and also the Jacobite movement that had moved to France and how the French Empire expands, those lodges as they open up around the world are utilized by Freemasonry, by the Illuminati, by the Rothschilds to control the military, the universities, and the banks, and later the media to control those countries. And so this is a very, very planned event that's happening with the expansion of the English Empire. And so, yes, it's a very, very good point to understand that all of these are working in concert with, maybe it seems separate at times, but they all have different objectives on what they're trying to do in fulfilling the same goal. And then 1785.
Will, can I ask you a very controversial question before we go forward?
Sure.
Do you believe that the Rothschilds were Hebrews, or do you believe that they were Ashkenazi Khazarians?
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it doesn't really make any difference. I know it does to a lot of people. I mean, the end result is they're Jewish Satanists, right? Whether or not they're pure of Jewish descent or they're not, to me, it's kind of irrelevant. But do I think that they are pure? I don't think so. But I think they've counterfeited the Jewish and made themselves amongst them. But I'm not saying that the Jewish people that are in Israel today aren't Jewish. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying all of the Jewish people in Israel today are Jewish. What we do know is there's a remnant of Jewish people for sure that survived the diaspora of 70 CE and the Roman catastrophe, and that they are the visible ones that are to be there because they're in prophecy, right? So they have to be there right to the end. But we also know there's the synagogue of Satan and the Satanist Jewish ones. And whether or not they're different people or they're not, they're certainly intermixed, and they've certainly taken on the Jewish sort of cloak, right? So just so that people understand my position on that. There's good arguments on both sides, but to me, it doesn't really matter. I understand them as Jewish Satanists and mystics, and whether or not they're pure blood or not, it makes no difference. They've declared their loyalty, and the end is still the same.
Right, and ultimately, you're exactly correct. And I am not a dispensationalist. I don't see one plan for Israel and another for the church, and neither do I believe in the Jewish conspiracy theory, that the Jews are controlling everything conspiratorially. I believe certainly there are Jews like the Rothschilds that play their part, but I believe Freemasonry is the coordinating element between the Catholics, the Jews, the Protestants, and all of these groups that are working together toward the New World Order, though they're literally fighting for control within it. But like yourself, and also I believe that in 1948, the Bible prophesied the return of Israel, and there's a national seed of Israel, and there's a physical seed, and there's a spiritual seed. And just because, and I believe it was definitely the fig tree prophecy of Israel regathering in 48, but that doesn't mean that they're spiritual Israel. So, and that's a whole nother topic we need to sort out. But I, like you, I believe there's serious reason to doubt that the Rothschilds are Hebrew. There's a lot of reason to believe that they're Ashkenazi. And I just want to throw something else at you. Have you ever heard of the Order of the Eagle of Georgia and the Seamless Tunic of Jesus Christ?
No, I have not. I have to admit, I've never heard of that order.
Believe me, I did not make that up. But it sounds like something you just would make up, you know, or you'd hear on a movie or something. But that is a serious secret society. And it's a secret society that I talked about on a broadcast Thursday night on Now UC TV. And it come into play with the fellow by the name of Abuna Palos, who was the patriarch of the Church of Ethiopia, who in 2009, he met with Pope Benedict and was claiming to produce the Ark, which of course was not produced. Right. But he was a member of this secret society, and it goes back to Georgia, not the Georgia Peaches, but the breakaway country of the former Soviet Union. And this secret society was formed in the 12th century, about 50 years after the Knights Templar. And they claim to be the physical descendants of King David. And the Bagratian dynasty comes from the same area of Russia of the Khazarian Jews. So the connections here are just too
big to ignore.
They really are. And like we brought up already this evening, the Rothschilds, through their connections with nobility, this is how they become players. And they
do. And they intermarry, and they start to intermarry. And I'll come to that in terms of when they change their name in a few minutes. And it's very important for the audience to understand that Jewish mysticism or Jewish Satanists and anybody who wants to call themselves that are a part of this whole conspiracy. But it's a greater conspiracy. This is about a worldwide movement of many different polytheist religions coming together that I like to call global Gnosticism. But it's a cosmology of all these other religions and bloodlines. And the Jewish mysticism part and the Jewish Satanism part is just one sort of component of that.
Yeah, I love that term, global Gnosticism. I think that's very accurate. But you go right ahead.
Yeah, so as they're moving forward and they're getting richer, they start to expand out of Germany. So in 1785, they start to establish partnerships with some other major families. And so in 1785, they're starting to intermarry with, the progeny with the Schiff family, who are going to take over Kuhn and Loeb from inside managing it down the road. And Schiff is going to migrate over to America to do this. And then in 1798, they set up the London Bank with Nathan Rothschild. And that's when they changed their name from Bauer to Rothschild, so that they're trying to avoid discrimination or anti-Semitism. But I think they just like the name Rothschild. It's like the red shield, right? As you trace that etymology back, which goes back to the Rosicrucians and what they sometimes believe are some of the marks of Cain and things like that. It's a whole belief system. So they didn't take that name without coincidence. And then in 1811, Jacob Rothschild sets up the Paris Bank, right? So they're growing and growing. And by 1814, they're now in complete partnership with the Warburgs of the German banks of Germany, and now we know of Berlin and Amsterdam as their major banks, right? And they have a partnership even to this day in those banks. So these are long-lasting partnerships that they're starting to establish, and you're starting to see a large web working with Freemasonry and the lodges and the Illuminati and the funding starting to take place here. And there's more intermarriage in these what they call covert stable of agents that they're sending up, because they're also working with the secret societies to establish the United States as being their platform to bring about the new Atlantis that Bacon likes to talk about. And so these partnerships continue to happen with some very, very powerful families, as when we finally get down to, at some point in time, the Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, these names start to make a whole bunch of sense. So as we said, as the Schiffs marry into the Loeb family of Kuhn and Loeb. And, Loeb at this time, around the same time, they marries into Kuhn's sister, and Kuhn marries Loeb's sister. And then the Warburgs, there's two Warburgs, there's Felix and another one that escapes my name. They're marrying into the Schiff family and into the Loeb family on the two different sons. And you've got Kahn, also part of Kuhn and Loeb, that is also marrying in with the Schiff family, or into the Sachs family of Goldman Sachs. And then you've got the Sachs marrying Goldman daughters, and you've got this complete intermarriage of money taking place that is all partnered individually with the Rothschild sort of at that sort of top. So they're setting up this stable of agents and this web of banking around the world that people don't normally associate the Rothschilds being sort of part of. But they own significant portions of a lot of these other banks. And so
one time, I think it was Paul Warburg was the head of the Federal Reserve, and his brother, and I think it was Felix, was the head of the Central Bank of Germany. And this is as World War II was heating up. So, and I believe, and I think you'd agree, that all of this intermarrying, it's for the purpose of keeping the money in the family, but it's also for keeping that bloodline pure, because these people believe themselves to be the true Rex Deus bloodline from King David, just like the Bagratians. They believe themselves to be the Diasponi of Jesus Christ through Mary Magdalene, and this whole belief that they have the right to rule the world through divine right.
Yeah, and one would also expect that they're perhaps marrying into other of the royal families, which they do as they go further down into the royal down into history, and they're always trying to improve on those bloodlines, right? I mean, that's sort of the way of the order and the hierarchy. The more pure the bloodlines are, the higher up they're going to be. So they're trying to ennoble those all of the time. And then as these organizations, they reach across into North America, they begin to fund J.P. Morgan as one of the main banks. And they begin to fund Rockefeller with Standard Oil, and they fund Carnegie and U.S. Steel, and they fund Harriman in Union Pacific, and they're gaining, monopolies over the banking system. They're gaining monopolies over the railway system, over the steel system, and any larger of the main industries that are starting to rise. And of course, the Morgans early on are actually more important than the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers will take over as the most important of the pseudo bloodlines. And I like that word pseudo because that's actually sort of spurious or false and not really the true bloodlines, but they're trying to intermarry as well as they intermarry amongst themselves. And so the Morgans will fund the Astor family, the DuPont family. They'll fund AT&T when it gets going. They'll finance GM. They'll finance GE. So you can see how all of these great families of North America get sort of caught into this web of money that has been transplanted over from Europe, and all planned by the Rothschilds, right?
And the bottom line is, for 7 generations, the Rothschilds, by controlling the money and by intermarriage and control of other families, they have controlled not only Europe, but America for 7 generations. And in so doing, people like us know about the Rothschilds and others, but they have kept themselves completely off the radar, for the most part, of any national news exposure. They have done this behind the scenes. They have succeeded in being the people behind the curtain pulling the levers. And it's amazing what they've done.
Yeah. And then, by, 1910, they've got Morgan and the Rockefeller families meeting to plot how they're going to bring about the Federal Reserve Bank. And this is the big turning point in Western society, is the creation of the first Federal Reserve Bank that's been duplicated all around the world to get control of the economies and the direction of the countries, right? And then what's interesting is in the year 1913, and 13 is a very important number in secret societies, just as Friday the 13th is an interesting day for the fall of the Templars. And on a very interesting day, just before Christmas, when most of the members have gone away for Christmas leave, they bring in a rush vote to establish the Federal Reserve. And that's December 23rd, 1913. Now, what's interesting about December 23rd is they picked it, I think, as a sign or an allegory or a code of their brilliance, because they like to do this over and over and over and over. For people who don't know what December 23rd is that day is very, very important to the ancient Benjamites, as they believe in their mythology, but more importantly, which are connected to the Benjamites, it was the day of Dagobert and the Feast of Dagobert. And if people don't know who Dagobert is, he was the last surviving heir to the Merovingian dynasty. And so when we talk about the bloodlines and control, they marked it on that day. I don't believe that that day that they used to do this coup was a coincidence. They don't work with coincidences, right?
No, I don't think so either. But I do know who Dagobert is. He was the brother of Yogi Bear. Oh, I know. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And also,
so I'm not sure who scares me more, is Yogi Bear or Dagobert.
I know it. Yeah, I think I'm more scared of Dagobert. And also, too, you have all of the symbolism of the winter solstice, the Saturnalia, the understanding of the occult powers at the winter equinox, and everything there reeks of a
Yes.
deliberate determination in what these people are doing. And after a while, when you look at the numerology and the dates and how these people do, I mean, it's just exactly, you're just spot on there.
Exactly, very well planned. And so, and the ownership will change a little bit over time. But if you look at the modern ownership of the Federal Reserve Bank, it's a private agency, which I think more and more people are learning to understand, as opposed to being government owned, which most people were raised to believe. And the Lehman Brothers are, they've been absorbed by the other families and banks, and so there must have been a great falling out of the Lehman Brothers to let them fall. So there was something that went on there that they didn't come and rescue them out, but they've just been reabsorbed. But what I can tell today, I mean, the owners are still, the Rothschilds are the biggest percentage owners, because first of all, their ownership is based on, from their Bank of London and Berlin, and then you have the Lazard brothers in there from the Bank of Paris. And again, there's some, at least appearance-wise, Jewish relationships there with the Meyer and Weil, I'm not sure how to pronounce that family's owners of different times. You have the Israel Saif Bank of Rome. And then you have the Warburg Bank of Hamburg and Amsterdam that we talked about with this intermarriage before. And Rothschilds are partners there. They have at least half ownership there. Then you have Kuhn and Loeb Bank of New York, which again, the Rothschilds are partners with, right? So when they were establishing these strategic alliances in the past, they're still here today, right? People need to understand that. This just didn't happen as coincidence, and it just didn't go away. It's continuing march to world occupation. And then you have the Chase City Bank of New York, which is the Rockefellers, which were funded by the Rothschilds, whom they're totally loyal to for putting them in business, just as J.P. Morgan was, right? And the Morgan Empire, totally loyal. And then you have the Goldman Sachs Bank, which again, we talked about that intermarriage and being part of the stable of agents. So this is still heavily controlled by the Rothschilds, not by U.S. citizens. And, the Rockefellers, although very, very rich and powerful, are not majority owners in the Federal Reserve Bank. So this is still being controlled offshore.
Right. And we would be totally amiss to fail to mention Brown Brothers and Harriman.
Yeah.
And at this point, enter Prescott Bush, the grandfather of W, and the Brown Brother Harriman Bank in New York, of which Prescott Bush, W's grandfather, was a member, directly involved in financing Adolf Hitler and the German war machine, as were the Rockefellers. It was well known that when World War II was in progress, that the Rockefellers sent tankers to Nazi Germany, as Henry Ford also was involved in industrializing the German war machine. Just absolutely outrageous how these people use the Hegelian dialectic to fund both sides just to make money and keep control of everything. Just absolutely outrageous.
Yes. Yeah, and also the London Bank of the Rothschilds. And the meeting was actually set up in London to set up the financing to bring Adolf Hitler to power and to continue the financing with different programs. And they set up specific banks to put all of this money through that are still in business today. And again, all of this stuff is absolutely connected. I'm trying to think of the bank that the two banks that were used in Germany, but the names escape me. But anyways, it's in my book here. You can look it up on the internet. It's not like it's a secret.
And also, have you ever looked into the story that Adolf Hitler was related to the Rothschilds?
Well, yeah, there's a mythology, for lack of a better word, but I don't think it's quite substantiated, that he was the bastard son of a mistress of one of the Rothschilds in Switzerland, as I recall.
And it was actually his nephew that released that story to the press, his nephew. And as the story came down, it was changed, and I can't remember what the name was, but Hitler claimed that his grandmother, I think, was a Frankfurt from Vienna. Yep. There were no Frankfurts that they found in Vienna. So that story fell through, but because Adolf was inclined to kill people, they dropped the story. But at
Yeah.
the time, the international bankers got on Hitler's side big time on both
Yep.
sides of the ocean. So people would speculate that he reestablished family relations and used that to finance his war machine. So we don't know, we can't prove it, but there are some good reasons to believe that Hitler was part Jewish or at least part Ashkenazi.
Yeah, and as it goes, is the mother was a maid or a servant of the Rothschilds, and that's where the affair took place. And then she keeps the baby, and they raise it, off to the side and hidden, and away from scandal. So it's possibility. I've not been able to prove it, but it's certainly out there, and it's certainly a possibility. And a lot of people will say, well, why would they fund Nazi Germany? I mean, they were evil right from the start, right? Why would they fund them? Well, you have to understand that National Socialism is their belief system.
Yeah.
Right? It's progressivism, right? And this was also an answer to their first mistake. And their first mistake was funding communism. And it went rogue and got out of control. So they move it a little bit from the left, from communism to National Socialism, where you have capitalism working for the agenda of a socialistic government, and all of the industry is controlled by oligopolies for the most part, with this sort of only small free enterprise underneath. And so that's why you have such major German companies that were created along with the banking system on the rise of Germany, because all of those selected oligarchy ennobled families of whatever connections were selected to be the oligarchs. And again, that's the end time waiting to happen. It's going to be that type of world society where the adepts are going to be the rich elite that are running everything. And so oligarchy is very much a part of left-wing politics as they want to have it. And you see that in Russia today, or you see that in China today, and you'll see more of that take place as we get closer to the end time. At least that's my thought on it anyways.
I think you're exactly right. And we saw some of these exact same people come to America in Operation Paperclip, and we saw that same international banking money establish these people as the heads of a lot of these major corporations that are so strategic in making strategic weapons, national security. It's just absolutely amazing what these people pull off. And that's why it is such a good thing for us to talk about this, because the things they do are so outrageous and they're so verifiable, and they are so ignored in the national news media that, it's just a really good thing, because a lot of people are figuring this out, because you really can connect these dots and connect them very readily.
Yeah, and as this is all going on in what is the first major sort of production of creating the Reserve Bank, and then communism comes shortly thereafter, there's some other organizations that will come shortly thereafter as well. But you need to also understand that in the same time period of those late 1800s, you have a creation of the Rhodes Society, right?
Yeah.
1891. You have Theosophy, which is a significant part. It's just, created by Rosicrucian, even though it's, most people think it's just Helen Blavatsky. She's funded by the Rosicrucians to do this, right? That's 1875. And Theosophy is the religion that the Nazis take in as part of their occultism, only they call it Ariosophy, and they take it a little bit more rogue still, and then they get out of control. But you have these organizations, and you have the round tables that are coming out of the Rhodes Society, right, that are going to work with the Inquiry, which is an agency created by Wilson during World War II, which is going to work together with the Fabian Society, which is created in 1884. If you don't know who the Fabian or the Fabian, depending on how you want to define that, who they are, is they were the first establishment of the progressive elite in the West, right? So they're basically doing the same type of ideology and doctrines that communism is doing with Karl Marx, right?
Yeah. And
only it's just a little bit different twist. And these are, they're the ones who created the Labour Party in England. And their main doctrines of that time are social justice. Have you heard that term lately?
oh yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard, about eugenics? That was their philosophy, and you see different forms of that by progressives today. Abortion was key component to their political platform. Universal health care was a core component. Not that I think health care is bad. And they believe that their national socialism that they wanted to create should be funded by capitalism for the agenda of the progressives. So this is national socialism that starts up in Germany. And they also believed, and you're hearing more and more of this in the progressiveness, progressive policies and rhetoric, is that all land should be nationalized and you pay rent. Nobody can own anything, right? Because they want to enslave everybody.
Yeah.
And those were all created back then. That were the fundamentals for the National Socialism parties of Europe, for the progressives of the United States and Canada that went underground after World War II for obvious reasons, with the fall of communism and with the recognition of how evil communism was and the fall of National Socialism, and they only started raising their heads again in the 90s. And now everybody has amnesia of where they came from, right? And their policies are still the same.
Yeah.
They will create a national socialism. And as I recall, they took their name from a Roman general by the name of Fabius, I believe, Quintus Fabius or something to that, very close to that. And he was the general who was fighting Hannibal. And he said the only way that we're going to defeat Hannibal is we're going to have to be very, very patient and wait for the right time. And then we need to act very viciously, very efficiently, and very violently to succeed.
Yeah.
And that's their MO. And they also have the same philosophy as the Illuminati and another famous person from history who said the ends justify the means. That's their MO.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly right.
This is the belief system. And this is the belief system that begins to work together with the Fabian Society, which is that belief system, and begin to work with the Round Table, and it works with American progressives like Woodrow Wilson, who sets up the Inquiry. And they create a couple of organizations that morphs into, by 1921, being officially called the CFR. That's funded by the Rockefellers. Yeah.
And we can really connect the dots here. The theology of this was laid by an Oxford professor by the name of John Ruskin. And one of his young students, who you've alluded to, was Cecil Rhodes.
Yes.
And Cecil Rhodes took notes. It says that all of his life, Cecil Rhodes took notes from John Ruskin's lectures and kept them in his pocket all of his life. And Ruskin put forth the theology that English-speaking world should confederate the world and control a one-world government. And Mr. Rhodes went on in South America. He formed the Beer Diamond Company and make millions, exploit South African people and the diamonds. And then, about 1910, it was John Milner, as you've alluded to, founded the Round Table groups, which became, on this side of the ocean, the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes.
And that has spawned into the Bilderbergers and other spin groups, Club of Rome, to, we've got several things here. We've got the Rex Dias bloodline these nobles that believe they have the right to rule the world. We have the Templars, who are the Rothschilds and the bankers that have the money. Then we have Freemasonry that's coordinating all. And through connecting all of these dots, we begin to get the picture that these same people, beginning with the Rothschilds for 7 generations, have basically succeeded in controlling world history. And as Franklin Roosevelt said, nothing happens by accident. They have been able to structure and plan world history that they're hoping to guide toward this one world religion and this one world government.
Absolutely. And again, a little bit more on the Rhodes Society. I mean, they were, what they do is they look for talent that they can bring in. These aren't necessarily ennobled ones, because they're going to get separate initiation and special mentoring. They're looking for unennobled bloodlines with people of talent, with talent and skill at a young age, that they hope through training and education that they're going to provide for them are going to be able to go into business, go into government, and will work towards bringing about world government. So that's what they're given this scholarship for. So people like Clinton, who come from the Rhodes Society, as a good one to, you know, as an example that people will know and know the name of, was a typical example of that. Other people, you mentioned it to it. I'd go a little bit further, you know, about what Rhodes was. He was a white supremacist.
Right? Oh, absolutely. Oh,
right. Absolutely was. And again, that is no coincidence from that period of time, because the KKK is a left-wing organization of initiation that was started by these progressives, right? So he was just in kindred company at the time. And again, they don't like to admit this about their history, and they tend to sweep it under, and now they call it all right-wing organizations, even though they're Aryans, which is a progressive ideology, even though they have initiation, which is a progressive ideology, and they're a secret society, and all of their organizations have the allegories of secret societies do, like, you know, Greek imagery or dragon imagery and other world images, realms, things like that. I mean, the KKK is absolutely inundated with Freemasonic and occultic ideology, because that's where they came from, right?
Yeah, and John Ruskin's theology, which Cecil Rhodes bought into, was nothing less than that white English-speaking people should rule the world. And they set about to accomplish that. And that plan is still well underway. And it is absolutely white supremacy. Absolutely is. And people don't get the connection between the left-wing and right-wing white supremacists. They think they're different, and they're really the same. Yeah. And just like the way the bankers control things, it's real easy to see the Democratic Party and their progressives as being virtually the same thing as National Socialism under Hitler or Fabian Socialism, but they have more difficulty in identifying free trade with the same agenda, which is one of the big things of the American Republican Party. And break that down for us, Gary, how free trade and this philosophy comes into this extending this arm of control.
Well, again, I mean, people think that why would left-wing organizations who sponsor unions want to be in favor of free trade? Even though sometimes they say they don't, they always continue to push it forward, right? Well, their ideology is to create a socialist world, right? So the only way you can do that is redistribute the wealth. And the only way you can do that is make the Western nations poor and raise up a little bit, hopefully, the other nations of the world. But corruption always takes that away, so that never works. So what you will end up with, which they prove over and over and over and over, and I would say China was the classic example before, where they went totally totalitarian rule, is as they created probably the most equal society the world had ever seen. And maybe that's a bit of an embellishment, but they're also one of the most poorest. But it was equal, except for the oligarchs and the elitists that ran it, right? Free trade is about international oligarchs. It is for the adepts. It is for the ennobled ones to grow more wealthy, bring everybody back down to a slave class who are, and you will see it in the end time, because people will be, trying to work for a day's worth of food, and they're not going to be able to do it. This is all about how do you create an enslaved group of people in the world. And you have to do that by taking their wealth away and lying to them that this is good for us. And when you have economic warfare around the world with unfair trade practices that they put into the free trade agreement, you pit low-cost labor from one end of the world against a higher standard of living. And in that economic warfare, if you can't compete because you have benefits and everything else, you lose your manufacturing, and you will only become a service economy, and a service economy can't afford to pay benefits or good wages. You have to make something, you have to create some wealth to raise your standard of living. And so not only does it do that, but free trade also makes all the nations more interdependent, right? And so that it will be easier to bring down the national borders, because they're trying to eliminate nationalism. And they're focusing on, the left wing, if you notice, are focusing on most issues that transcend borders, like free trade, which, like the environment, like any sort of apocalyptic thing, whether it's volcanoes or hurricanes or nuclear weapons, the peace movement, anything that transcends borders, they are funding.
And then they take
yes, and again, trying to bring the world together so that they can move towards a world government. So it's all working together, but just because it's a left-wing party doesn't mean they don't want free trade. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen in the end time. Free trade everywhere.
And you made such a great point on the Rhodes Scholarships. And after a while, when you study this long enough and you watch these people, you can understand what they do, why they do it, and how they're doing it. And as you said, one of the things they did was to establish the Rhodes Scholarship. And you mentioned Mr. Clinton, and Bill Clinton was such a perfect candidate. He was a brilliant person, whatever you say about him. He was so capable in getting things done, and he was such a slave to his passion. What an easy fella to get something incriminating on to control. And I remember when Mr. Clinton accepted the nomination to run for president the first time, and in his acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention, he mentioned and glorified one of his teachers by the name of Carroll Quigley.
Yes.
He studied under at Boston University, which was a good Jesuit school, which also gave us Bill O'Reilly, and of Fox News. They're studied at the Jesuit school in Boston University. But I have here, I hold up a book about every Saturday night, I think. But our book of the week this week is Tragedy and Hope. And this book was written by Carroll Quigley, who was a teacher of Bill Clinton at, I said Boston University, Georgetown. Carroll Quigley taught at Georgetown. And Bill O'Reilly, he went to Boston University, maybe Georgetown too, but they're both Jesuit schools. Doesn't really matter. But this is 1,500 pages of sheer boredom. That's about the nicest thing you can say about it. But in this book, Mr. Quigley admits to firsthand knowledge of the conspiracy of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Round Table Group to take over the world and destroy American society. And he says so. And he names names. And he says, I agree with it. I think it's a good thing. But after making the mistake, and I'll not bore everyone, I could read all kinds of astounding quotes where he names names of the people we've mentioned so far, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Rothschilds. He tells it all, and he verifies how that these roundtable groups basically bought the Eastern establishment schools of Princeton, Harvard, and Yale,
Yep.
bought them like prostitutes,
Yep.
took control of the educational elite schools in the East and totally turned our country around. And it's all right here. And you talk about a book disappearing. This book disappeared libraries. I mean, they snatched this thing up like wildfire. But I have a copy, and if you're lucky, you still might find a copy. But this is a most amazing book. And when Mr. Clinton praised Carroll Quigley, at that time, I was knee-deep studying conspiratorial history. I was devouring every book I could find on the subject. We were writing our first book called The Occult Meaning of the Great Seal, which is basically a little conspiratorial history tome. But this is how they do. They will tap individuals that they know they can use and control. And Mr. Bill Clinton was such a person that they tapped. And their continued interest in Hillary shows us that they are not only devoted to this agenda, but they are people that are being controlled by others that are pushing this agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we have that control of the universities that are owned by these other groups that people will have never heard of, you understand why the Ivy League schools, whether it's Harvard or it's Princeton, these are the ones that control a country. These are the ones that all the business leaders, for the most part, of significant corporations come from, and or government, right? And right from those initiatory societies that were started within these Ivy League universities, which again is a mini initiatory system with those houses that they have on university campuses, right? Complete with hazing rituals and everything else, and all the Greek sort of allegories. This is part of that training system to draft and select people who are going to enter into the CFR. And there's different levels of that sort of drafting of organizations, with the Skull and Bones being one of the top groups, right? With the more wealthy of the families. And so if you want to be in the Trilateral Commission, or if you want to be in government of any significant level, or you want to be part of the directional or the heads of so many of these political and secret societies today, you're going to go through the CFR. It's the stepping stone to rule and power. And they all know that because they're raised in these families and they're told about this all the way through, that they're going to go through it. And you see this reflected in movies, where they've got them getting together at an alumni. This is an alumni of the privileged families, right? I mean, it's all part of it. And they all end up going into the CIA or the government or the big business, or they're the wealthy families. And it's something that we have to really understand, because it is such a powerful organization, and there's only 2,670 members at any one time, right?
Skull and Bones?
No, of CFR.
Oh, CFR, okay.
Yeah, and so it's a limited amount, and so you really have to be skilled and the most knowledgeable. But you see these people come up all over the place, whether or not it was Clinton, or it is Cheney, or it is almost anybody of famous politics that's going to be large in a government are CFR members, because you're just not likely going to be called. I don't know whether that's going to hold true with Trump or not. We'll have to do some digging, but whether it's the Obama organization, the Bush organization, all the way back, they were filled with CFR members. And in my book, I'll name a whole bunch of some of those organizations, or those people, just as examples of who is CFR. And, when we had Gore and Bush running, you had two Skull and Bones and CFR people as members members running for president at the same time, and Kerry as well. Like we weren't getting a choice. It was just pick which progressive you want. One's on the Democratic Party, one's in the Republican Party. So again, understand that. And they also publish a paper that's called the Foreign Affairs newspaper, right? That is the setting of all policy for the elites on foreign affairs. That's where they all write the op-ed and they take their marching orders from. And when you watch Sunday morning talk shows and you got people coming on about politics, they just say CFR member or some sort of CFR organization. These guys are active everywhere, right? And so if you want to know what's guiding from the American side of educated people and societies, look to the CFR. That's where they're playing their largest role in bringing about world government, because it's still the economic powerhouse of the world, even though the last 8 years kind of made it take a step back or two or three, maybe wobbling a little bit, but it's still the economic powerhouse, and it's still going to be one of the driving forces to bring about world government. So the CFR is a very, very important organization because it funds so many people into key organizations and governments. But also, I mean, you have to look at that as being on par. I mean, you have the Club of Rome that you mentioned before, which was formed in 1968. And that is for sure one of the more important organizations that most people aren't aware of. And I remember growing up and watching CBC News in Canada when you had a prime minister named Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and he was filmed going into the Club of Rome meetings. They didn't report on it afterwards, after they were shut down for reporting on that. But these are very powerful families. And of course, Pierre Trudeau married into the Sinclair family of Scotland. And so this organization which was formed in 1968, was formed to start pushing the world in its final push to world government. I think it's taking longer than that they want, but they divided the world up into 10 economic zones, 10 spheres of influence, 10 trading blocks, however you want to call it, that will form the end-time world government. Yeah. So it's a very, very powerful, and they very, very powerful organization of ennobled bloodlines. And they wrote, some people say they report to the Rosicrucians. Actually, I think they report directly to the Committee of 300. But there's mixed feelings on that. So, but doesn't matter. They're very, very powerful, and there's going to be significant ennobled bloodlines that are involved, and up and comers in on that committee. So, and of course, you have the Bilderbergers as well, which is huge. But you probably have some things you want to say on the Club of Rome.
Well, and like you say, it's hard to say how it all works out, because they are secret societies. But Aurelio Pesci, who is the Italian billionaire that formed the Club of Rome, you can look from their the information. They are wanting to put structure. They want to implement this plan at some point in time and put flesh and bones on the actual implementation of it. And the CFR, it helps coordinate things in America, though there are people from other countries involved in the CFR. And then you have the Bilderbergers, which controls Europe, then the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral aspect is bringing in Asia, North America, and Europe, coordinating all. And this is the thing now, getting the Asians on board and involved. And that can be a little spicy sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Buy into that. But, you know, we can't always tell who's pulling the strings, because there's a lot of infighting. They all want the one world government, but there's a lot of infighting in the kingdom of darkness over control.
Sure.
So it's
absolutely
all
Game of Thrones
on the evil side. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is.
So, and for people, in case we brushed over it, when I said the Sinclair family, so that people understand the tie-in, in case they're not aware of this. This is the St. Clair family that are part of the Noble Bloodlines, part of the organization of the Knights Templar, part of the European Masonic Order, and the ones that created Freemasonry after the fall of Templarism. So when somebody marries into the Noble Bloodlines of the Sinclair clan, this is important. And of course, that produced Justin Trudeau, who is Prime Minister of Canada today and is making news headlines up here that he doesn't want to have, although there's nobody asking the right questions. But he got caught taking an all-expense-paid trip to the Aga Khan. And again, people may not know who the Aga Khan is, but that's sort of the leader of Sufism, right? That's mystical. That's mystical Islam. And this is one of the wealthiest people in the world who runs this organization. And Sufism is that organization that the Templars and the Masons of Europe merged with when the Templars were formed.
Yeah.
Tell me these connections don't span 1,000 years.
Yeah. And now this is another whole layer interjecting the Muslims who are now doing the same thing. They have bought into Harvard to establish the chair of Islamic studies, which is implementing this pro-Muslim philosophy that's coming down out of all the elite American schools. So they're playing the same game, and they're interrelated in all of this also. So this is just a rabbit hole that it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And the extent that these people will go to control and manipulate people, there's just nothing they will not do to keep control of power.
Oh, I agree. And again, they are frustrated that they can't move things as fast as they want, but we as Christians understand that that's because of the restrainer. So try as they may, and they will continue to try and bring about the end time because they want this rendezvous with destiny. They want this showdown. They want their new age of Atlantis, and they want to try and fight against the evil God of the Christians, as they call our God, so that they can win their own realm in a separate universe, just as a Star Wars allegory goes.
Wow.
This is what they want. So they're going to continue.
Yeah.
And they're not going to stop, and they're going to continue to put the platform in place. And what's different about what they're trying to build this time than any other time in history is that in this, and prophecy tells us this, is that the Antichrist isn't going to conquer the world. The Antichrist is just going to assume power with the whole world government being put in place first. And because it just takes too much time, too long, and nobody's ever been able to conquer the whole world. But now he's just going to take it over. When the 10 beasts or the 10 kings hand over power to the beast, and then he gets rid of 3 of them, right? Because he probably wants to redistribute the plunder in this greater sort of socialist world that I was talking about, in a way that, makes Obama's bloviating small by comparison.
The Antichrist will say, "You didn't build that," and he'll just split it all up.
Yeah.
But, we don't, and we're here tonight talking about the workings of the evil people with all their money and all their power. And as God's people, we don't want to get overwhelmed with gloom and despair. We've got to remember that the Lord is on the throne, that Satan and these people are on the leash of the Lord Almighty, and that God is in control, and that God's people will have victory. Rothschild said he didn't care who made the laws as long as he could print the money. Well, as God's people, we can say we don't care who rules the country or makes the laws, because God is on the throne. God will have his people, and we can be encouraged even in these times. So we don't want to put forth anything in such a way to have people be in fear or despair. We have every reason to have the victory in these dark days, and have every confidence that our God is in control.
Yeah, we want people to better understand what's going on, so that they won't have fear, and just that they won't be confused as to why some of these terrible things are going on, or why this happens, or why that happens. Understand it has to happen, and we just want you to understand how it's happening.
Exactly.
And that there's nothing we can do to stop the end times, because it's ordained. And when the restrainer is removed, it will happen, because it is ordained. But I think what we want people to do is help other people, so that, for at the time of the Gentiles that that we're in right now, there will be as many greatest numbers as possible for the fulfillment of the time of the Gentiles. But I do believe that time is drawing to a close, and the fever pitch and the pressure and the intensity that is happening is trying to force this thing to happen sooner than later. But again, and if it's not the right time, it's not going to happen. There's just going to be more confusion and more turmoil. But it will still sort of stumble on if they can't bring it about. But they are aggressively working at bringing it about.
They really are. They're working at breakneck speed. And talk, if you will, just a little bit, Gary, about the Bohemian Grove. This is certainly one of the most fascinating aspects of secret societies and what these people do, and one of the most bizarre.
Yeah, so I mean, the Bohemian Grove, that's an organization that meets about once a year in California, and in a middle of a forest somewhere, and they have this big statue of an owl, and they do some crazy rituals there, and dress in women's clothes and other things that are really kind of bizarre from what we learn about what goes in there. And not only does it have the owl sort of imagery, it also has this weird thing about spiders not to come in, and so this sort of goes to that not everything's sort of monolithic in the movement, but spiders have to do with, like the Nazca spider that's in South America, that's related to Orion, and of course Nephila is origin of Nephilim, and where some people believe Azazel is hung in. So there's some weird allegory that goes on it, but the organization, as I understand it, is more designed to decide the direction and who's going to lead the United States, because it's the biggest player in the world by an incredible margin. And so typically you understand that nobody can run or win the presidency unless they go and pay homage at the Bohemian Grove and are initiated and are sanctioned to be one of the blessed ones to win it. So all of the presidential candidates do their pilgrimage to the Bohemian Grove to get the blessing to become president. So this is really about controlling American power and the pseudo blue bloods and new money, and getting them indoctrinated into the secret societies and working for the occultic causes and world government, just as the more famous and wealthier ones will graduate up to be invited to go to the Bilderbergers, right? Like Bill Gates and those people. So it's kind of, again, I think it's more of a hierarchy. I may have that wrong. That's my understanding of it. You kind of go through that, and then as you rise up in power and influence, whether through money or through government or what have you, then you become the limited amount of invitees that go to the Bilderberger Association that lay out the world sort of plan, and European as well, but they're bringing together people from around the world in what we see as the visible Bilderberger meeting, not necessarily the true Bilderberger organization inner circles, right? But they do meet with these people from around the world once a year to set the agenda of what they want to accomplish for that year to bring about world government and the end time.
Yeah.
And they don't say they're bringing about the end time, but
no, they won't say that, but that's what they're doing, even if they don't know it. And I think you're exactly right in your analysis there. We see the CFR first being spawned from the roundtable groups of John Ruskin's vision. And then after that, we have the Bilderbergers, which on a higher level is going to bring Europe in, and then later the trilaterals, which is going to be Asia in. So we see here a progression and an inner working that is all designed to bring everyone under that jackbooted heel, if you will.
And the Bilderbergers were formed in about 1954. And Prince Bernard, who also owns Shell Oil. So you have royal family and you have the oil industry again. Decides he wants to create this organization, and you are 100% correct that the first thing they wanted to do is have a united Europe, right? Which would be, again, a platform like the United States to bring about the world order as they would see it, right? So that's been a little bit messy as it's going on, but all it's going to do is, I think it's just going to reshape Europe from one trading block into two. I really see, and some people think three now, but I was talking about these trading blocks in the 90s with my friends and stuff, that this was what it was all about. But yet it couldn't stay as one, because if you look at how they think, and if you look at how things have worked in history and how they put importance on different things, is that it's too big, and Germany wasn't part of the old Roman Empire and was kind of off to the side, and it always had its own dominance, right? And you had France and England kind of on the other side, not always friends, but always really linked tightly, and especially through intermarriage amongst the kings. So I think you're going to have a European, Middle Europa split that's dominated by Germany.
Yeah.
And then I think you're going to have another one. And England may or may not be part of that, but I thought years ago that they would be part of it, but they may actually be moving back to our roots and maybe part of a North American trading bloc.
This is an extremely volatile time in Europe, all over the world. Then you throw in a dash of Vladimir Putin and a sprinkle of Donald Trump, and boy, we better hold on and pray and watch to see what happens.
We have a rise of oligarchs.
Before we go any further, I want you to tell everyone how they can get a copy of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, how to get in contact with your ministry. We want to do it again at the end of the broadcast. We haven't done that yet. And I want to tell everybody, if you want yourself a little brain candy, get yourself a copy of Genesis 6 Conspiracy. There it is. And it's one of my go-to books on this topic and so many topics. And if I didn't think it was, I wouldn't tell you so. But this is one of my go-to books on a lot of topics. So, Gary, tell everyone how they can get your book.
You can get my book through Amazon.com or Amazon around the world, BarnesandNoble.com, most online bookstores. You can also purchase it through a retail bookstore, although they may not stock it, whether it's a secular bookstore or a Christian bookstore, because it's distributed by Bookmasters. So if you tell them it's just to look up on the Bookmasters inventory, they can order it in if you want to support your local bookstore. If you'd like to have a signed copy, you can go to my website and buy a signed copy and have it addressed in any personalized way that you want, or I'll do a standard writing that I do on signature, and that's at www.genesis6conspiracy.com. And for those of you, and most of you will be in the United States listening to this, but if you try and purchase and it doesn't go through, it's probably because there's a credit card restriction on foreign purchases, so you need to get a hold of the credit card company to take that restriction off, because they're trying to prevent credit card counterfeiting and identity theft. So if that happens, that's what's going on 99% of the time. And you can follow me you can email me through the website. You can also follow me on Facebook at Gary Wayne, and also under two Genesis 6 Conspiracy pages. And you can follow me at Twitter at Gary Wayne 63, at Gary Wayne 63, and you can contact me in all of those formats. And if you do contact me and ask a question, I will get back to you.
Thank you so much, Gary. And thank you again for joining us tonight. And for those of you that don't know, Gary Wayne is a Canadian. And I would just like to ask you, as a Canadian, do you see this whole thing of the global conspiracy? Does it have things in Canada locked up as tight as it does here in the States?
That's a good question. It's not as in your face as it is, at the power center of the world, right? But the policies are distinctly, and have been for a long time, distinctly progressive. And even the Conservative Party, they used to be called the Progressive Conservatives until they changed that about 10 years ago. So there's always sort of that sort of political movement. It's very much a global leaning bias today up in Canada, I think. Yes, we are nationalistic, but we want to be, Canadians want to see the world get along. They want to see the borders sort of come down. So the brainwashing has been very, very strong up here. It's just not, you just don't see it overtly because we don't have a big impact, and decisions we make up in Canada don't necessarily have a worldwide impact, right? But they're always in support of the UN. They're always in support of directionally to free trade, to directionally to global environment laws, to world government, to everything. You can't do anything without the UN, as corrupt as that whole thing is. So no, it's not nearly as prevalent, and the secret societies are not nearly as prevalent. You will see some Freemasonry temples and things around, but they're not everywhere. Interestingly, they still have in the East some Templar societies of families that usually hold membership in both Freemasonry and the Templars.
Mm-hmm.
But no, not nearly as prevalent as what I see coming out of America.
And this is where it's coming down. It's being implemented right here through the UN and through the American, through Wall Street. So obviously the focus here would make it more blatant, more in your face, and
more intense.
Oh yeah, it's getting real intense. I guarantee it's getting intense, and the whole volatile feel. They're feeling it in Europe with all the immigration, the Brexit in Great Britain, and Putin and Trump is just also volatile. There's such a struggle for power now. Like they thought for so long that they had it wrapped up. But now with Donald Trump and Brexit, what I fear is that these people are going to be tempted to have some kind of a false flag event to consolidate their power once again. And this is just something, one of the many scenarios I think that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, and whether it's a man-made created catastrophe or an event or false flag events or all of the above and some natural, they'll need that catalyst to do it. And if they don't get a natural catalyst, they'll create their own disaster or event to drive people to world government. And that's likely to be some sort of nuclear attack if that plays itself out, because that's the only thing from what they can do other than financial collapse, which they will also cause, that will drive the world together, right? Yeah. But I think the world is more resilient than they think. I think they'll need a number of catastrophic events and false flag events, not just any one. And they're going to have that alien deception come out. They're going to have to bring everything to bear, because as they're seeing is as brainwashed as people are, at a certain point where they see that they're getting shafted, they reject it, right? Maybe not for long. And we'll see how long, let's say, England lasts on what they did not to be part of the European community. But we also see the uprising in Europe, whether it's in Germany or Italy, against all of the immigration policies and the absolute anarchy that is causing with so many, and non-vetted and incidences that are coming up in Europe. So there is a pushback, and they may not be able to persuade the people or fool them, and they will have to go to extraordinary measures to move the agenda forward, if that is the case.
Right. And I believe the final shoe that will drop is Isaiah 17:1, where it says Damascus will cease to be a city,
Yes.
don't go away. And I think that will be the final event. And like you say, we could have several before that. And I think that will be the final one that will bring in the last half of the 70th week of Daniel. And our theme tonight is Illuminati families and surviving giants. Well, what does surviving giants have to do with this? But I think actually what's driving this train are these noble families who are Nephilim bloodline that believe they are, and I think a lot of them, they know they're Nephilim blood, and they're claiming to be the true lineage of King David, the diasponi of Jesus Christ through Mary Magdalene. Their belief that they have the right to rule the world by divine right, this is what's really driving this train, and has even into antediluvian times.
I agree. At the end of the day, those are the ones that are pulling the strings in the background. You have all of these different organizations. These are the lower level operations. And so until you get above the Rosicrucians and the Club of Rome and into the Committee of 300 and the Council of 33, are you getting into the real ennobled bloodlines that are all represented, even though half the Rosicrucian hierarchy is probably ennobled bloodlines. So that's that sort of intersection where you start to get it. But it's still the 13 families and the heads of those 13 families that control everything. And that's just the 13 families of the West.
Yeah.
Right. And people, what they don't really get is that these bloodlines, these Nephilim bloodlines, have existed throughout the world. So you have bloodlines in Russia, you have bloodlines although a lot of those ones in Russia were destroyed, but you expect a bloodline descendant to be the end-time oligarch of the Russian group of nations. And you have the Chinese Red Dragon bloodline, and you know, which also is part of the Japanese bloodline. You have the bloodlines in India. And so you've got these bloodlines that have worked together for the last millennia as sort of the secret world government. People don't know that they were actually meeting in times past. They never always got along, but they were talking about their bloodlines and their right to rule and who they report to, you know, well over a couple hundred years ago. So again, not well documented, and you wouldn't expect it to be, but that's why you have, again, because they like to hide things in plain face with their history, and that you see in some movies and some literature and stuff where these people are meeting these worldwide ancient fraternities of ennobled families, right? So there is more than just the Western ones. They're the most powerful. They're driving the boat, but they are respectful of the other bloodlines.
Right. And and when I say this, and I think it's by design, it's designed that way, you almost want to giggle. But when I was talking about the Order of the Eagle of Georgia and the seamless tunic of Jesus Christ, and I was studying this, that goes back to the 12th century. I've studied secret societies for years, several decades. I'd never heard of this. And in this secret society, one of the members, and I believe that they very well could be the secret society that controls the Ark and many other relics that they could use much to their advantage in the last days. But one of the members of this secret society was one of the prime ministers of Japan. So, you know, these things very much have a global reach, and these elite families are doing what they've been doing for a long time, and they know how to do it. And we've got a religious agenda. We have a political agenda, and we talked in our show on the Priory of Sion how that we've got the Templars and the Priory of Zion working in the two different areas, the political and the religious. But on page 508 of your book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, you talk about Tony Blair and how his Labor Party brought in the central bank in Great Britain. Now, so Tony Blair was in the political, then the financial, and now he's in the religious. Tony Blair is now at the United Nations, the head of the organization that is dedicated to bringing all the world religions together. This cross-pollination, you just can't miss it.
Yes. And another interesting thing about Tony Blair is as I recall, is his first action as prime minister is to put the Federal Reserve Bank concept in place in England.
Yeah.
It was one of the last holdouts, which was amazing because that was, still one of the financial centers of the world, right? But he put that officially in place. And if you look at some of the countries that have fallen and had a whole bunch of issues, mostly in places like the Middle East and into Afghanistan and places like that, those were holdouts on putting in the Federal Reserve Bank. And all of those have fallen. I think only Iran is left. And I'm wondering whether or not the deal that they signed, that somehow they'll turn that over as part of the deal. That's part of the secret part of the deal.
You bet they want to.
Yeah. So, again, those false flag events that they create to further their objectives happen all the time. You just don't know what their agenda actually is. And when you look at members of the CFR or the members as Tony Blair, who's part of the Labor Party, which, obviously still pays homage to the Fabian Society, again, which most people don't know, but Fabian Society is still very active today. And you look at Freemasonry, which is considered as the training ground for occultism, right, for new initiates, and that all of these are tied into the World Parliament and into governments and into all the different occult organizations like the Lucis Trust. All of these people are part of these different organizations, government, political, business, and religious, that is global Gnosticism. And they're all working towards the same cause. And just as I said, it's very odd that Justin Trudeau, son of a Sinclair mother and of a Club of Rome father, and goes to meet the Aga Khan, who is the leader of Sufism, which is Islamic mysticism. Like,
oh gosh, you got to be kidding! It's such a tidy package, isn't it? I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, and it's an amazing amount, and I'll list them in my book. Some of the members that were high-ranking government officials in the United States government that have been part of and leading Lucis Trust over the years. Yeah. It's absolutely bizarre how occultism spills over into the highest echelons of power. It is their religion.
Oh yeah.
And they didn't set up, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear, they didn't necessarily set up the United States and the United States Constitution to protect Christians. They set up the Constitution so that their religion wouldn't be persecuted. They set up the Constitution that they could turn it against Christians under hate crimes and a whole bunch of other things when they wanted to. Just as all other constitutions around the world have been set up as a model that was first created in the United States to do the same thing. They'll protect every other religion in the world except Christianity.
Exactly right. And then to top it all off, Tony Blair converts to Catholicism, flies to Rome to kiss Papa's ring, but he had a little problem when he got to Rome to kiss Papa's ring. all of these American evangelicals were there, and he had to get them out of the He was there, and Paula White and James Robeson, they were all lined up there, and Tony had to push them out of the way to get in there. But, you know, it just all comes full circle again and again and again. And after a while, you just can't miss this stuff. And,
yeah, and, you know, speaking on what we were just talking about earlier, and remember, I know you do, but for the audience, all of those different groups that I said were set up after the fall of the Templars, I included the Jesuits.
oh, yeah.
Right? Which were the extension of what they needed to rekindle in the Roman Church that the Templars were serving. And the Jesuits were set up to control not only being at the front edge of what Catholicism was doing, so being on the exploration of North America and destroying documents and doing everything in a propaganda sort of way, but also in control of Roman Catholic religion. And not religion, but in universities and education. And you mentioned the Jesuit schools earlier that educate, you know, the high-level Catholics in the country. And what's significant about all of that is that Saint Francis of Loyola, who started the Jesuits, he was a Gnostic. He was a Gnostic mole. He believed in, and he also had visions of Mary, and he was also a Basque who has a noble from the Basque community who have higher, they believe have higher noble bloodlines than the 13 families and been ostracized because of their elitism. That's their belief. That's their fight, not mine. And he promoted the continuation that the Cistercians and the Benedictines and the Augustines did to interpret Christianity through the philosophies, through the 7 sacred sciences. That's how they interpret the Bible, and that's their lens, right? So that's that philosophy, Gnosticism mold into the Jesuit society. And of course, we have the first Black Pope because the leader of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope, right? Leading and being the white Pope at the same time, leading Christianity or Roman Christianity. So we have a Jesuit at the head of Roman Catholicism as so many other things are becoming more intense. And I totally reject that he is the Antichrist, and he's not even the false prophet, and he's too old to be. But he will be the anti-pope. He is the anti-pope, I think, that is going to set things in motion for the false prophet that will bring about Antichrist. So when we talk about Tony Blair, you talked about Tony Blair going and kissing the hand to the Pope and all the other things we've talked about in Tony Blair. And we talked about all of these mystical connections, and what has to happen is this universal religion as well in the end time. All of a sudden, you start fusing these dots together and you start to see a picture.
Right. And I am going to, I don't know if, I don't think Brother John has been monitoring the chat. I think he's spending time with his family. So I know that my loyal staff, Sister Donna, is right here in front of me monitoring the chat. So I am going to ask her, if John isn't around, to pass to me some questions for Gary. Can you do that, Donna? Oh, John, are you there, John?
I am on, but if Donna wants to do it, I'll gladly hand it over. She's done an awesome job.
I didn't know if you were there or not, but we're getting down to 11:30. It's almost question time. So
I'll do it if she doesn't want to. I appreciate her.
Go right ahead, Brother John. I just didn't know if you were there.
And I also want to appreciate Kevin Stoll for monitoring the chat in YouTube. He's done a great job of moderating the chat. It's been a really good chat in both of them. I've been watching them and also been listening. You guys, man, fantastic information. I mean, it's a blessing, a serious blessing for a lot of people to be able to hear this stuff. This is not stuff you get hardly anywhere. This is amazing. So thank you guys once again. First questions from Donna. It says, do you know anything about the giants and Nazi base that were supposed to be found at Antarctica? It was reported on Coast to Coast AM last night.
Is that for me or is that for David?
That's for both of you guys, I would imagine.
And all that I know about it is that there was a fella on Coast to Coast last night, kind connected with WikiLeaks that is claiming they're going to release information to confirm Nazi bases below the ice in Antarctica, giants, UFOs frozen in the ice, the whole thing. And they claim that they're going to release this information and reveal it, so we don't know, but it was very, very stunning with all the talk we've had about Antarctica. And we talked with Timothy Alberino about this object they found down there. So this is that's all I know. And this just was last night. So it's kind of a wait and see type of thing. But this certainly is a stunning claim, and whether anything materializes from it, this is something we really want to keep our eye on, because this, and you know, they were saying last night on Coast, this could crash the stock market if they would release this. And there are things that you can just see from Google Earth. There's objects down there that are unexplainable in the eyes. So this is something, you know, you don't want to just buy into it whole hog, but it's something that we want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's so much speculation on what's going on in Antarctica today, what's gone on in the past, and I know it's probably made some very good shows on shows similar to this, and maybe on the paranormal. We do know something's going on down there. Something extraordinary is going on. There's way too many people going down there to visit. A very, very high level people going down to visit. There's this constant stream.
Yeah.
We do believe there's a significant trail of evidence suggesting and pretty much confirming. I don't think many people doubt it who know anything, you know, dug any information out about it, that the Nazis did get to Antarctica, did do some exploration on there, most likely did set up submarine bases, because they set those up everywhere they went, because that was their only mode of safe transportation on the oceans. And it's just a matter of how big a base is and what they were working with. And it's also, as you talked about Operation Paperclip, where the U.S. took, you know, 1,200, if I might have been 1,500, but 12 to 1,500 scientists in that roundup of advanced scientists that had learned things that the world hadn't learned before, that are mysterious, and how they created all of these magnificent weapons like, you know, Tiger tanks that were generations ahead of themselves, the rocket, you know, aircraft that had jet engines, the single wing aircraft that would evade radar, and on and on and on and on. This bell-shaped thing that everybody thinks that they never did find, that might have been a weapon or time travel or something to that effect. And so, and the advancement of the American technologies, even though we don't know probably 10% of everything that they've developed since World War II. Where I'm coming to all of this is when you have a connection of something like Antarctica, Germany, and everything that I just talked about, there's going to be some explosive stuff that comes about. And whether or not it's all released or only parts of it are released, it's going to have an impact in shaping the world. And they're going to use that to drive people to world government. Everything you have to understand, they've known about, right? It's just when they want to release it, how they want to release it, and who, if they're talking to people, whether it's aliens, ancient Nephilim, I don't know what the speculation you want to use on that. Keep your eye on the ball.
Absolutely.
It's how they're going to drive to world government and bring down the borders. And if that information doesn't do any of that, then they won't release it. I think it's as simple as that. So no, I don't know anything new that they've discovered down there or what's about to happen, but I do believe 2017 is a significant year in the transition of what was and what's going to be. I think 2017 is a threshold year, and I don't claim to be a prophet. I just see so many things coming together from so many different places that all point to 2017 as the year that we'll look back on and said, the world changed in a way we didn't realize. And that means if that is the case, and so many of these sources suggest that, then we're going to have to see some things that are quite extraordinary. This would be one of them. Just as we're going to see extraordinary things come out of Rome if this is the year that things are going to start to move. We're going to see significant things happen on the economic area. in economic markets. And, there's been a lot of speculation that they couldn't continue to not have a financial correction beyond 2017, because everything they did was in hopes they could inflate their way out. They don't believe that they can do that. So the only other way to do it is have another 2008, probably worse, right, to reset it. So there's a lot of things going on. And I think something like that could trigger a stock market crash, or it could be that false flag event to cause the stock market crash, to fix and reset, and to bring about that cataclysmic change I was talking about earlier. So I'm open to all events. I know that sounds like I might be a little bit wishy-washy, but they're all interconnected. And that's why I say you have to keep your eye firmly on what is the objective and the agenda, and on this tactic, what are they trying to do with it?
We got to be locked into the watch and pray mode. Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, guys. Next question from Brian. Didn't the Rothschilds get kicked out of the temple to the 10th generation, or is that a falsehood to confuse people? You guys know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about that. And I don't have anything other than their suggested connections back to the Essenes, which would be part of the temple priests. So without that genuine sort of legitimate connection that I've not found, I'm not sure that there's anything to that. It may be part of their mythology, but the Essenes don't usually play that sort of way with their internal games. So unless David knows more about that, I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not either.
All right, on to the next question then. From Jennifer, genealogical science says that we have Neanderthal DNA. 23nme.com says I have 88% more than all others tested. I believe what they are calling Neanderthal is Nephilim. What are your thoughts?
Well, I know that's being thrown around, that there's an intermixing of Neanderthal, and there's a rewriting in science of the family tree, and how many different types of beings might have lived at the same time. And there's also now a recreation of how intelligent Neanderthal was. And when we were growing up, and even up to a few years ago, they said they were these stupid caveman people. Well, now they're saying that they're as intelligent as humans. And even their weapons, even though they're quite different, were more effective for the Neanderthals, and they were an equal intelligent human being to that of the humanoids of the time. This is coming from science. And that when you bring in the mystical aspect of it, their belief system was they had these areas where they had Neanderthals, they had humanoids, they had little people, they had all these different sort of competing races that for some reason overran their locations and borders and started to intermix. I don't know whether or not we have Neanderthal DNA or not. I don't know whether I can believe anything that science tells us these days. I also know that, our DNA is like, 98% similar to every other animal on the planet. So I don't know what they're talking about when they create these other great percentages that says we have of Neanderthal man. Now, Neanderthal, what were they? I'm not real sure. What we do know is that they were slightly different than humans, and we don't know when they lived and did they exist with us or not. That's all, to me, is sheer speculation, even by science. So I think Neanderthal man was, different than the human creation of day 6 or Eden, depending on which side of the fence you want to come down on that. I think they're definitely different than that. I do not believe they are day 6 humans. I do not believe that.
Anything to add to that, David?
I do not. Go on to the next question.
All right. From Cynthia, I do have a question. I've been watching the Medici show. I believe is maybe it's Medici. I don't know if it's Medici show on Netflix. Medici show on Netflix lately. Despite their lack of nobility, I've gotten the prevailing thought that they might be ones of the Illuminati bloodlines that are still around. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, they were a rising family of bankers in Italy. And, after the fall of the Roman Empire and into, sort of the close end of the Dark Ages, they started to rise with the financing. And they were very, very famous for benefactoring significant people of Priory of Sion, Grand Masters, and also occultists, writers, and artists, and magicians, and people of that sort. So they were a significant benefactor to, whether or not it's Da Vinci or Michelangelo, or so many people that wrote the important works of Rosicrucian and alchemy and translating of the ancient works out of Greek and other languages into European languages. They financed all of that. So to be bankers, though, of that time, they had to have some sort of bloodline, right? That goes back into the Italian bloodlines, but it wasn't thought to be super significant, and they don't show up in the 13 families. But they were very powerful and rivaling against the Roman Church, and thought to be holding to, I would call it Gnosticism, but they had, because out of Italy, it was more of Mithricism was their form of religion. And you see that coming out in some shows about Da Vinci and things like that. So a very important family, especially in the Middle Ages, not super ennobled from what I can tell.
All right. Unless David has something to add, we'll move on to the next question.
Well said. Go right ahead.
All right. From Cott. Is the story of the Khazarian Jews a myth or misunderstanding, or did they really just adopt Judaism? Do you guys know, or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think we covered that off a little bit earlier in the show. And I'm not as much a fan of that whole mythos. I recognize that a lot of people over the years have wanted to be Jewish and become Jewish and married into it and lived with them. Although I don't know why they would have wanted to have done that over the years with the discrimination and persecution of them over the years. But I do recognize that, coming out of Eastern Europe, there was a big faction there. And the question gets to be, and I know DNA testing suggests that a lot of them may not be. I'm not sure I'm convinced of that, but I'm, as I said earlier in the show, I'm more of a fan that I don't care who calls themselves a Jew. I know there's Jewish Satanists, and I know there's the remnant of the Jewish people, and I know not everybody in Israel is pure Jewish, but that's not important to me. I do try and be very careful of the Khazarian theory, because there's a lot of racism that goes along with it, and anytime you get a lot of that, that means there's a bunch of misinformation in there as well. If there was less hate involved, that would be more helpful to me. But I'm not going to utilize that type of research, even though there's definitely things to it, to dismiss the remnant of Judah that we know has to be in place and visible in the end time. I just won't go there.
And I believe in the Old Testament as well as the New, Israel is a spiritual entity. You can see in the institution of the Passover, where the Lord said that the stranger could join himself unto Israel and partake of the Passover. And it also says right in that same passage how that the Hebrews, if they were not loyal to the Lord and did not do things as he said concerning the Passover, that they would be put out of the congregation of Israel. And now we are the Israel of God as those that have faith in Jesus. This does not negate the prophecies of the restoration of Israel as a state. As I alluded to earlier, there is a national seed and there is a spiritual seed, and there's also a fleshly seed. We did a teaching called The Four Seeds of Israel, and it gets, there's obviously a lot involved, but in 740 AD, King Bulan of the Khazarians converted to Judaism. And this is the area right now that we mentioned earlier of southern Russia. And then in the 10th century, there was the Scandinavians came down and conquered Khazaria. They were called the Rus. And from the 10th century AD, it became known as Russia. And many, and I, as I said earlier, this ties in with the Bagration dynasty that we talked about Thursday night in relationship to the secret society, the Order of the Eagle of Georgia. So there are definitely Jews or people that say they're Jews that are not. And there is a true bloodline and there is a false bloodline. And as Gary said, this is often used in a very anti-Semitic way. And to me, it's an irrelevant question because Israel is a spiritual entity, has nothing to do with ethnicity. So there are definitely people out there that are anti-Semitic that want to use the Khazarian issue to anti-Semitic ends. And you can't talk about the subject without mentioning and clarifying that. But
yeah,
is something to the fact that there are Asian people from this area of Khazaria that are not Hebrews, but yet are converts to Judaism. So,
yeah. And, you know, I also look at it this way is that, you know, the Christian part of the end time, the Christian time is very, very important, obviously, but it can't be more important than the root. And as Paul said, we are grafted in and the branch can't be without the root. And God will remember his remnant. Even the lost tribes of Israel, he will remember them in the end time. It's in the covenant. He will fulfill his covenant. So we want to be very careful that we're not working against the original tribes of Israel, and the visible ones today would be Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. And whether there's mixes in there or not, we just need to be respectful and careful. I just do not move in a way that is going to be disrespectful of the Jewish people or Christians. And I'm not here to be part of anything that divides us. I'm only trying to be part of what unites us.
Right. Or to disrespect or denigrate Muslims either.
Yeah.
They
have free choice to do what they want to do.
Or disrespect because ours, right? I don't know. all I can say is this, you know, there are people, a lot of these people that are Jews they're not all wealthy like the Rothschilds and stuff that are supposed Jews. So, you know, like Gary said, why would they want to bring all the persecution upon themselves if they're not really the Jews that they, you know, a lot of them can trace their bloodlines back from a far generation. But one thing I would really want to add to you guys, think about this. There's billions and trillions of dollars being put into propaganda out there, and you really need to really think about that. Unless you can prove it through DNA evidence or through a lineage or anything like that, it's really all hearsay. I mean, the same kind of propaganda was promoted through Hitler to kill lots of Jews in the past. So definitely something to be handled carefully. And but like Gary said and David said, there's probably a little bit to it. There's always a little truth in the mix with the poison, so just be careful with that subject. And I'll move on to the next one, guys. I don't want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I take heat for not supporting that theology or that theory. It's just because it's not let it dismiss it. It's just you want to be careful, you want to be respectful, and it's not Christian to be hateful. So let's just, you know, try and get your approach right first.
Right. And I think we have abundantly learned that we can't believe what science tells us. And we all agree with that. So we have to be, let the Bible be your guide. And enough said.
Enough said. All right. We got time for one more question, guys. It's 11:55 right now. And so we want to try to end this around midnight. I know it's getting late. for most of us, we could go on for hours because there's probably like 50 more questions after this. So I'm gonna pick one at random. I'm just gonna kind of stroll through here, and I want to get into this one because this a lot of people. You had a post about this earlier, Gary, about the Rh negative bloodline.
Oh, yeah.
About your post on Facebook. Somebody asked about that post. If you can expound on that a little bit and talk about it. I think it's a really hot topic right now. There's so many people talking about this. I mean, it's all over the place. So if you could expound on that, that would be our last question for the night. And I apologize if we didn't get into your questions. We will definitely have Gary back on again. And David, we have David every Saturday. Gary, I know he'll probably come back on with us unless we made him really mad this time around, but he'll probably come back on with us again. And so anyway, Gary, let us have it. Let's hear about the Rh negative.
Yeah, I put a post out there on our Rh negative. I do get asked on this on a regular basis, and some of it can be a little bit technical, but I just wanted to have people understand what Rh negative was. Is that it is a missing D antigen, and then what an antigen is it generally is a thing in your body, in your blood, that attacks viruses and bacteria. So that's what the negative is. So if you're positive, whether you're A positive or you're O positive or you're AB positive, or whichever of the 4 blood types you are, that means you have the D antigen. If you're negative, you don't have that D antigen in all of the different blood types. And so I put also with that a few facts about there that only 1% of North American bloodlines of Native Americans and Asians have negative bloodlines, and only 15% of the world population has Rh negative bloodlines, and about 40 to 45% of that Rh negative bloodline is centered in Europe, but heavily into Southwest France and into England. And the royal families, like the Prince William or Queen Elizabeth or Charles, are O negative bloodlines. And the heaviest concentration of Rh negative bloodlines actually comes from the Basques, and they actually have about 80% Rh negative. And and the Basques believe they are the purebloods from Atlantis. They actually call themselves Homo Atlantis as their species. And they believe that they were the first settlers in Europe after the flood, and they seeded the Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization and the Scythian civilization. And I was just trying to get some information out there as to what Rh negative was, and that, if you don't go back very far in years, is that you used to have to get a blood test before you got married. You don't have to do that anymore because they have drugs now to take care of this issue. But if you don't have a negative bloodline in the past, and you married somebody that had a positive bloodline and you were negative as a female, that baby would probably die, right? And so the negative antigen that's missing for some reason is a distinction and from the positive bloodline. And as I said, the antigens aren't meant to kill babies. They're meant to kill viruses and bacteria to help the body. And so this is something that's been kind of mixed in from somewhere, right? And it's not natural. And that if you have bloodlines that are coming from, like a single source, you should be able to reproduce without any issues, right? And the negative thing is that insertion. And so I think this goes against the idea that this negative bloodline is something that's natural. It's actually, when it recognizes that it's got something that's positive as a bloodline, that is foreign. And that's why it was negatively, in my opinion, affecting pregnancies before, which now they overcome with a lot lower risk level. And so I think that this comes about because of, as one possibility anyways, could be Neanderthal, which was brought up earlier, but I go more towards Nephilim bloodline being inserted and then mixing with the human populations after the flood, which is why you get it spread out throughout the earth, but in lower quantities, and then centralized amongst the royals, and then centralized amongst that Central Western European nobility that we've been talking about sort of indirectly all show, and I talk about on the shows, and the royal families, right? The 13 families in the royal families. They are typically high level of negative bloodlines, and they people who have it feel like they're different, that they're, you know, more superior and more intelligent, but they distinctly, whatever it is, the summary is they feel differently, and it could be because of that. And so I think it actually goes back into the genes that have been mixed in. It's more of a gene marker because you can't have something inserted and have something missing, right? If you're missing the D antigen, that sort of says, well, how was something inserted? So I think it affects at the gene level in sort of how I would understand it. And that would be the gene that they would call, you know, the spark of the divine, or 1,000 points of light, or the gene of Isis, as they like to call it, that manufactures a blood type that has a missing antigen. And that's how that insertion comes about.
What I might add here to this final question, I'll read a scripture. I haven't read a scripture all night. Titus 3:5. It says, "Not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us by the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Ghost." And so many people get in despair when they find out they have Rh negative, and they begin to think, well, I've had calls from people and emails that, you know, I think I'm Nephilim, I can't be saved. And whatever Rh negative blood is, when we are born again, we are regenerated. And in scripture, we see Rahab the Canaanite, Ruth the Moabite. Not only were they redeemed, but they became a part of the bloodline of the Messiah. So don't be forlorn or discouraged that you're something wrong with you to where you can't know the Lord. Whatever it is, God can take care of it. And even people with Nephilim blood, and I'm not saying Rh negative is Nephilim, but even we see people with Nephilim blood that were redeemed. So just take courage and hope in the Lord, and keep your faith in him. He is able to overcome all things, certainly our genetics.
Yeah. So I gave a quick summary. It actually takes, you know, about an hour show to cover off all of it on it. And so if you want some information on it, I do a quick summary, and I posted it today on the Gary Wayne timeline on Facebook. And I've also put in there a few times, because there's getting to be a lot of responses on there, that and it underlines what David is talking about is this is information about Rh negative and some percentages and some populations. This is not about who is damned and who isn't.
Absolutely.
This is, I mean, I do not believe anything in the physical nature, except for maybe the first generation of Nephilim, and keeping in mind what it says in the Old Testament, you know, sins of the father up to 4 generations. So however you want to interpret that or beyond, I believe the physical aspect has nothing to do with your salvation. This world is sinful. We are in vessels in a body. It's a spiritual thing, right, that you need to be concerned with. And salvation only depends on who you believe in as God, who do you believe is your Redeemer, what your faith is in that, what is in your heart, and what you do. So this has got nothing to do with whether or not you have different DNA, you have a different blood type or Rh negative bloodline. If you believe in Jesus, he is bigger than every sin and corruption on the earth, and that's what the atonement that he came to do for us did. So it's got nothing to do with salvation.
Amen.
And don't mix spiritual with the physical.
Amen. Satan is the great race baiter.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, and so much for sharing this information, because this is golden information, and this is not something that a lot of people can come by very easy. Most people, you have to watch, I don't know how many videos just to get this amount of information you guys packed into a 2-hour show. It's outstanding, and I'm thankful, and I know the audience is very thankful. And I just want to say thank you to the audience for being very respectful tonight to each other, and for loving each other, and for fellowshipping together. We always appreciate you guys. We appreciate our guests. And if you haven't subscribed yet to our network, please do subscribe. It's the button right here below the video on YouTube. And then you can also click the bell to get notified when our new shows are coming on, and so you'll have it right then. You'll know exactly when we do it, because we do live shows about 5 nights a week. Also, make sure to check out Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Great book, fantastic book. One of the Gary put like 20 books into one book. I mean, this is an outstanding 1,000-page book of just information after information. Also, David Carrico has a YouTube channel as well, FOJC Radio, and he has a website, FOJCradio.com. Please go check out their work, and you will not be disappointed. But I just want to say thank you. High five, everybody, and shalom. And until next time, this is Now You See TV.